Okay, so there's a long history here. Engineers Without Borders started in 2004, 2005. So I'm trying to encapsulate what we've done, maybe more importantly what we've learned, maybe more importantly what I've learned, as far as the experience, what it's taught me and how I'm trying to project that into what I'm doing in the future. So just a bit of background about why we do this, why Engineers Without Borders or something like that is important. Primarily because students started asking for it in about 2004, but also because important people like Bill Wolf from the Academy, the ASEE, ABET, National Society of Professional Engineers. There's a lot of organizations that say it's important for students to understand ethics and global issues and how those two things combine. Hey, it was a good thing to do to start something like Engineers Without Borders and meet some of those other needs. Just to give you a little background on the organization, it started in 2000, roughly the year 2000. It provides oversight for student engineers at universities in the United States. There is an Engineers Without Borders in Canada. There is an Engineers Without Borders International. They have similar functions. But the purpose is to sort of provide oversight, backing, direction, advice to student chapters that want to do projects in the third world. Sometimes the students who are involved can tell you that, and I could tell you, that their oversight gets in the way, or it feels like it gets in the way. It's difficult for us as a chapter of Engineers Without Borders because we're the only chapter that doesn't have a civil engineering program at the university. And because of that, the civil engineers who make decisions at Engineers Without Borders sometimes don't think that we know very much about what we're doing. And so we have to jump through a few more hoops. But in the end, I think that ends up meaning that we learn more and we understand more about what we're doing. The organization has grown beyond its own capabilities. And today, the volunteer staff of about 12 people have to deal with about 300 chapters. There are also professional chapters of Engineers Without Borders now, typically made up of graduates of schools where they were involved with the chapter as a student. We have a very vibrant Detroit professional chapter of Engineers Without Borders that's led in large part by Kettering alums, paired up with about the same number of Michigan Tech alums who are civil engineers, and they have a lot of stories to share. So in 2004, this is kind of my background, I started getting a lot of students asking for me to write letters of recommendation for the Peace Corps. In 2004, I think 8 or 9 students in a row, like in 1 week, asked for letters of recommendation. I started to see that this was something that students were interested in where they hadn't really demonstrated, at least to me, that kind of interest. So I got together with some members of student government and we put together one of those SurveyMonkey surveys, and friend, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend to go take that survey so we can find out if students are interested. There were about 310 A and B section students who took the survey over about a 48-hour period. And a vast majority said they were definitely interested in being involved in an overseas project that had a humanitarian aid component, or that they were somewhat interested. There were really only about, of the 310, there were really only, I don't know, 30 or 40 who said, no, not interested. Now, it's a self-selected group, obviously, but it seemed like, wow, we've got some momentum, and this might be a really important thing to do. And so we sat down with the students who were interested, and we looked at different options. There's a big organization called EPICS, comes out of Purdue. Engineering Programs in Community Service is the acronym. And their focus is on programs and projects in town, in the area of the universities, typically in, poor neighborhoods around universities. That was a big organization at the time, and Engineers Without Borders was the other sort of comparable size organization. Engineers Without Borders didn't look at all, as a matter of fact, it prohibited any projects domestically, and it focused more on projects that are international. So it wasn't a big surprise that students really thought that the international idea would be more interesting. And so we started the process of creating a chapter. Now, when you go to the administration and you say, I'd like to start this new student organization, here I've got about 200 students that are interested, one of the first questions tends to be, how much is this going to cost? And so the students who started this with me, we had to make some difficult commitments to the university administration at the time, saying it won't cost you anything. We'll raise all the money we need to raise to do any projects. We weren't going to ask for anything from the university. And that's still true today. The students raise the money through grants, through their own pockets, to be able to do these projects both locally and internationally. So started things with this project called Climbing Through Flint, 2006. We had this organization called Engineers Without Borders. The schools in Flint, there were about 20 schools that had no playground equipment that was safe. So we decided that we would build playground structures. We would design it and build playground structures in some of these elementary schools. Sound like a great idea. We met with the Flint representative from the Flint schools, and we had really an easy time of it. In many cities, we would have to have gone through all kinds of liability, paperwork, and so forth. But at the time, some of the playgrounds had high power structures in the middle of their playgrounds. It didn't seem like safety was as big an issue as maybe in some parts of the country. They had no problem with it. So we began to design something that looked a little bit like this. Got a budget, figured out it was going to cost us, I don't know, I remember about I think it was about $1,000 per structure. No, I take that back. It was more like about $500 per structure. Sat down with the students and said, okay, we passed the hat around to faculty, and we pulled money out of our pockets, and we had, I don't know, maybe $1,500. So, okay, we could maybe do 3 of these. And the students said, no, we want to do one in every school. Okay, my job was, you can do it, you can do it. And so I crossed my fingers and said, yeah, we can do it. These are A-section students at the time. That was the first group. So between January and March, we came up with a design. We came up with a budget. We started fundraising, started talking to their employers and neighbors and so forth. The numbers started to go up as far as how much money we had. It started to look like, maybe we could do 20 of these structures. Right before they went to school, I went back to work. We sat down again with the person who was in charge of the playgrounds in Flint schools, and he said, this is a great design. This looks like a really good idea. However, you can't make it out of wood because they will burn them down this summer. And so you should probably consider a coating or perhaps a material that doesn't burn, like a composite lumber. We took a big gulp because that doubled our cost. It also changed the way we felt about what we were doing. I can tell you, I felt it too. The students and I were like, well, shoot, if they're going to burn it down, why are we even going to bother? Right? And many of the friends of the students who were involved started kind of laughing at the whole idea. Why in the world would you go and do something in inner city schools in Flint if they are going to destroy it within 6 months before the students even get to campus? It's going to be gone. Why would you do this? I didn't have an answer. I was just the cheerleader. I was just the person that said, yes, we can do this. Cross my fingers, please. Hopefully we can do this. So at the time, there was a wonderful hometown lumber supply place called James Lumber. Those of you who are from the area might remember that organization. Wonderful, community-driven. We had met with this one of the managers at one of the local stores and recognized that was a new thing. I thought, I can get everything at Home Depot. It was a new thing to think about going to the local store. But that's a part of community development too. So we did that. Just turned out that he had just purchased some composite lumber from a company that made that stuff, and they were going out of business. And he had purchased it, and he was going to give it to us, not at cost, he was going to give it to us at 10% off cost. He was going to take a loss to give this stuff to us. And so it turned out it was going to cost the same amount as making this from wood. And the very day that we had to have the prototype built in the gym so that the people from the Flint schools could come and inspect it, that very day we had enough money to build 20 units for 20 schools. And I took a deep breath and didn't pass out. And here's the locations of all those schools. Some of them are not such great neighborhoods. We didn't feel like it was our place to be able to pick which neighborhoods that these would go into. There were a handful of schools for which the union, UAW, had built really nice playground structures. So we were able to say, okay, well, they have stuff. But the rest of them, we said, okay, we're going to somehow do this for all of them. 20 schools, 20 units, and we were going to do it over 3 days before the semester started in the summer. July 4th, 5th, and 6th, before the new semester, we were going to build these. And so we did. We had industrial engineers on the team who were really good about thinking, okay, we got to set this up in a staging sort of fashion. So we had some who were literally making kits that contained all of the lumber, cut to size, all ready to go, with all of the hardware wrapped up on a crate, ready to go to a site. We had some wonderful farm boys on the team at the time who knew about equipment I didn't even know what it was when they said, oh, we'll get one of these. And I'm, okay, let's get one of those. I mean, literally the right team right there with all kinds of enthusiasm. And over 3 days, we built these structures. Each day, on the first day for a structure, was a prep day, getting the site ready, digging the footings, having it all set. While at the same time, the kits were being made right in the parking lot, right by the gym. And luckily, we were able to combine one other program, this Lives Improved Through Engineering program, happened to be on campus at the time. So for one of the days that we were building, they helped out. This, one of the sites was Pierce Elementary School, kind of close. And I got to talking to the teacher for one of the classrooms about the fact that at the same time we were starting an international project in Mexico, and it involved cleaning water. How many of you got some of the nice, I saw that you got some, yeah, and Professor Ali, do you want to drink some of that?
I want to know before.
You want to know, what do you want to know about it?
What is it?
It's safe.
Okay, then I'll drink it.
Okay, go ahead. Oh, you know, some of you might not have seen these. I had some bottles out there with some really safe water. It just kind of looks a little different, but I can pour some for you. Whoops, because some of you might want some too. And I only had 4 bottles, and so I'll pour some for you, and you can have some. Here, Sebastian, you probably want some. Yeah, Adam. Well, now these are my students, and I just gave them a test, so they feel like they have to drink it. Paul, why don't you have some? So this little village in Mexico had water kind of this color, but not safe. This water's safe. It's just got Dr. Pepper in it. It's safe. I just did this little demonstration thing just to demonstrate how even if you know me, even if I say that's safe water, even if you know me, it doesn't really look safe, and you might be a little nervous about drinking some, even if you've never had the experience of what happens when you drink unsafe water. You still might be a little nervous about drinking it, even if you know me. Imagine a group of people who've been drinking it for a long time, and to whom I say, bad water, don't drink that, and don't give it to your children. They don't even know me. How in the world would they trust me? And if I make that a different color, and now it won't smell the same way, what would make them trust me to believe it's safe to drink now? I just want to insert that thought, because the piece of doing humanitarian aid work that we, members of EWB, have begun to sort of understand turns out to be the same piece of humanitarian aid work that the rest of the world, the rest of the group of people who do this kind of thing are starting to understand, and that is, it's not about the technology. It's not about the problem even. It's really more about trust and what does it take to get trust. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but back to our whole issue with people burning down these playground structures. It's difficult to imagine that you'd want to do something for people who don't trust you enough to keep it there, that want to destroy it as soon as you put it there. And strangely enough, the same thing happens when you put this kind of a system in Mexico. There are people who want to destroy it. Not that they just don't want to use it, but they want to vandalize it. They don't trust you. And in Africa, same kind of thing. They're, oh my gosh, I've come, I'm saving their lives. I'm making their children healthier. But they're breaking this thing that I'm putting in. It happens. It happens in Flint, happens in Mexico, happens anywhere. Because people who are in poverty are in a different place than you and I are. And it's difficult to understand their motives. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going, but that's the stumbling block. That's the thing we got to figure out. And there's something tied, I think, to what we are as engineers designing things for customers as well. The only thing is, typically when we're designing something for a customer, they want the product. Or maybe they're not quite sure, but if we make it interesting enough or fancy enough or cheap enough, they will. This is a process of designing something for people who don't really know they want it and might actually actively not want it, even though it's good and even though you believe in it. So this is Pierce Elementary School. When I talked to him about this project in Mexico, the teacher here, and that we were going to try and figure out how to filter this water, and he thought, oh, let's make this a project with my kids. And so we got involved with them just as we were getting ready to go to Mexico the very first time, asking, well, how do you think we should clean this water? And it was more of an exercise, much more about fun. And you can see that we also ended up with some t-shirts that were kind of cool that funded this trip, called Globalize This, with a heart. They love those shirts. And it really wasn't about this guy, saying thumbs up. It wasn't about the little kids who had little pretend parades around the structures as we were building them to celebrate these students, these kids in orange shirts who were building these playground structures. They had pretend parades with pretend musical instruments to demonstrate how thankful they were. And it wasn't about the very angry person who decided to try and take some old t-shirt underwear and stick it between two slats of one of those structures the day after we built it and douse it with kerosene and light it on fire and find out that it just went out as soon as it hit the structure. But it wasn't about that. And it wasn't about how bad we felt when we saw that, how angry we felt, how difficult it was to get energy to build structures that day, having seen that. It had to be a matter of coming back to, why am I doing this? It's not about getting a pat on the back. It's not about getting a thumbs up. And it has to be bigger than, are they going to use the technology that I put here? Are they going to get their lives together? It's not even about that. Okay, so I mentioned that the civil engineers at Engineers Without Borders have a difficult time understanding that mechanical engineers have much to offer. I love this story. Our first project was in Mexico, unfortunately kind of close to Monterrey and all of the big drug cartels, and that's why we can't be there right now. The area was very drought-ridden. There were some reservoirs that the government had built that would fill with rainwater, and that was the source of water part of the year. Part of the year there was no source of water. You couldn't dig a well 100 meters down and find water. They lived in these kinds of dwelling places. They were somewhat nomadic. Here's what the reservoir looked like when we arrived. Pretty much empty. Lots of animals around, lots of animal waste that would run off into these reservoirs and cause it to be contaminated. The government had moved this poorest of the poor in Monterey out into the middle of this desert with a promise they would own this land. And that's a big deal. If you own land, then you're real. You're a real person. So they moved these people out, given them this land, taught them how to take a crop that grows there called the candelia plant and boil it to get the wax to sell to places like Wrigley, because it's one of the chief ingredients in all brands of chewing gum. And so they built these underground furnaces to put a mixture of that little bit of water they had with this hydrosulfuric acid, which happened to just show up on their doorstep at the right point in time, and boil it and throw these leaves into there and then stand on top with their sandals to make sure it all got in the boiling water, then let it cool, and the wax rose to the top, and that was the product they could sell. And you can see some of that wax on the top here. The water was contaminated. This is Monse. Monse was really wonderful about, Rabago Smith was really wonderful about going with the team. Her language skills really were so definitely helpful. So we had this one problem, water contamination. We had a second problem, that we needed to be able to test the water, which involved incubating the samples in an environment where we couldn't necessarily keep things at the right temperature. So this is how the civil engineers keep they used duct tape, and they took their water specimens and they would duct tape them to the inside of their thigh and sleep that way. And that was how they would incubate their specimens before testing them. And our students said, ooh, and they designed incubators with a car battery and a teacup heater and a thermostat. And the civil engineers were amazed and featured this project at their conference because they'd never seen such an amazing thing. And we were all kind of scratching our head thinking, well, of course. A lot of team building, a lot of trust building, and it's easiest to do that with children in the village. And sometimes, if parents see the trust developing with children and a team, sometimes that can turn into trust with parents. This is our water contamination solution. It's based on a method that's developed by a scientist in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. This is a slight modification, but the idea is that it is a slow sand filter, but it is a sand filter that does not ever need to be back flushed because it never mechanically filters anything. How it works is the very fine sand is at the top and the very coarse at the bottom. This coarse on the bottom is really just there to hold water. And what happens is a layer of algae is allowed to grow at the top. That algae consumes some of the biological material in the water and it pulls oxygen out of the water in the process. Then the water proceeds through this gravel and sand, and as it gets deeper and deeper, the amount of oxygen available gets smaller and smaller and smaller until the bacteria that needs oxygen, the aerobic bacteria, suffocates. It's not trapped, it's allowed to pass through, it's just dead. So aerobic bacteria is killed and passes on through and is not mechanically filtered, so it doesn't need to be back flushed. Anaerobic bacteria that doesn't need oxygen is not terribly unsafe, so it's allowed to pass through. And one other thing is allowed to pass through, which is difficult to trap mechanically, and it is not necessarily requiring any oxygen, and that's viruses. Viruses are tiny. And so once you pass the material, the water through, you get rid of you kill the oxygen requiring bacteria. Then there's a post process called SODIS, solar disinfection. You just put the water in clear containers and allow solar energy, UV light, to pass through it. The bottles can't be really large because the solar energy has to get all the way through. But what happens is UV radiation sterilizes viruses. And so they're still there, they're just not going to hurt you anymore.
The color?
The color? Well, it doesn't look like Dr. Pepper in water. It definitely looks a lot clearer. It smells a lot clearer. Unfortunately, they don't really like that different smell. It's an adjustment. Okay, well, back at the ranch, while we're working on this project in Mexico, we're also building ramps here in Flint. That continues. And we're learning that the whole process of, you don't give the man the fish. You don't even really teach a man to fish. You have to help a man make an income from fishing before your idea on how to improve their lives is going to take hold. And according to the United Nations, it's even better if you can help the women in the community make an income because that's most sustainable. So here we are. I ran a class during a summer term when I didn't have a teaching obligation where we were trying out different kinds of filters, seeing if we could create filters they could build and sell and make income. And so there were a couple of different iterations. This one wasn't quite very successful. Using fiberboard, it kind of burst open and there wasn't enough duct tape or electrical tape in the world to be able to keep it closed. But how it works is there's a tube that runs from the bottom of this vessel to the top in the wall. So as you run water in the top, then that pressure head allows water to come down through and out that tube that's in the wall and out the side. So you might be able to see that tube here, and there's a vessel. This is concrete here. That tube would have entered at the bottom and come up the side and out the hole. This is a second revision. We started using these cardboard tubes that are used to build pylons. So we had a rectangular outside with a circular inside. And our final design used 2 of these tubes. And at the bottom, again, there would be a clear plastic tube that would come from the very bottom, run up the side in between these 2 and out, and you would fill that level, that donut, with concrete. Afterwards, you could peel the cardboard off. You could leave the cardboard on. It doesn't really matter. The cost is about $15. The current method uses stainless steel frames that cost $800, and you have to ship them. You have to get them into the third world. This would allow them to be able to build these for somebody else at a cost of about $15. And my hope had been, and maybe one day will continue, that we could help them actually make these cardboard tubes from refuse, because it's just a matter of adding wax to the recycled material to make these vessels or these tubes that would hold the concrete. Enter Africa, and it's 1 o'clock. So this is going to be fast, and I apologize to the team who's just come back from Africa with me. But at this point in time, we get B section finally gets its glory, and we get a project in South Africa doing something somewhat similar, but in a very different environment. Here, there was no end to the amount of water. There was quite a lot of water. There was quite a lot of water below the surface as well, and many people had come in and drilled wells, which had in the past been the method of bringing water to the third world. But our planet cannot sustain that. We just don't have enough water underneath in the aquifers to continue to supply water to the growing population. We have to come up with a different way, which is what we did in January. But give you a little peek at South Africa. This is South Africa in our winter time, their summertime. The dwelling places around, we think, based on what I've read, that this has a lot to do with their religion. It has a lot to do with their sense of the danger of evil spirits in corners. It's also part of the reason for coming up with a new filter that's not square, but round. A thatched roof. Originally, when the Zulu people lived here, these thatched roofs came all the way to the ground. The missionaries that came into the area purchased the land, gave the land to the people to live on. All they had to do was make sure they had doors and windows. So they have doors and windows now. The structures are made out of mud brick. And they also have structures that you can see here that oftentimes for storage, sometimes for living spaces that are more maybe conventional rectangular buildings with corrugated metal roofs. And it was those rooftops that we wanted to use. Here's one of their bathrooms. It's difficult to convince people in this part of the world that sanitation is important. And there are animals all over the place with animal waste. And if we could get some way of getting the animal waste and the human waste in one location like we do in the first world, well, then we probably wouldn't have as much of a water problem. But it's difficult to make that. Again, they're beautiful children that we met. This is a great picture. This is Jordan taking a picture here. This is the picture he took. And we have another picture of him showing them the picture he'd taken, because that was a new thing for them. Another team subsequently went and they built one of these biosand filters. Unfortunately, we decided the best place to keep that was in the school, a local place, a place where the children were, where the families would care. But during Christmas break, nobody was there to tend the sand filter. And so it went dry, which isn't a bad thing, but they just sort of didn't bother with it after that. So it was an education thing and it was a trust thing. This was when we arrived. We provided some cisterns and guttering systems to get rainwater for 30 families. And interestingly, back to trust, and then I think I'll probably wrap up. Back to trust. This community, when we went the first time, and I use the word we, I shouldn't, I only went the first time in January. I wasn't able to go with the team before, but I like to use the word we, living vicariously through the students. The first time the team went, we knew their water was unsafe. We'd been asked to come and come up with a way to help clean their water. They heard there were engineers coming. They wanted a cell phone tower. Now we chuckle, and I chuckled then. I thought, well, how ridiculous is that? Why in the world would that be more important than safe water? But who am I? They've been drinking this, and what they know is they need income. What they know is the men in this community go to Durban, go to Johannesburg, they spend a week, maybe 2 weeks, they're away from the family, and nobody can reach them. Why wouldn't they want to have a cell phone tower? Unfortunately, we didn't know enough. I don't think we knew enough about listening and about trust building. And we just said, no, you're wrong. We're not going to do that until we do this. We're going to put in a biosand filter, because that's what we learned is the best way to get you safe water. We were acting in the best interests of the community, but we weren't listening. So we put that in, and they didn't really take care of it. They said, we want cisterns. We want cisterns to hold our rainwater. We want rainwater. At the time, when we read what was recommended in the third world, what did they say? They said, drill a well or use a sand filter. They didn't say use rainwater. So we didn't, and we told them not to. And again, I don't think they trusted us because we were not listening. I don't know the magic to how do you help people learn to listen. There's something to that for all of us and engineers, no matter what we're designing. I think that the group and I can say we started to feel this trip like they knew we were listening, only because it was the first time we were listening. I think that's a really good word to end with. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to go give a talk.